seems to me there's like two things that can happen. There's characters that crop up when you're writing, and then there's the characters that you think of when you're coming up with the story. And sometimes the ones that come up when you're writing say out of necessity, like you need someone to drive a cab, or a policeman needs to show up. There's sometimes, for me, the characters that then gather the most momentum, and maybe it's because you didn't directly think of them. For example, just now I've written a scene in a police station, and I kind of needed someone else. One of my characters sort of kicks off, um, and I needed someone else to be there, basically. And so this kind of old lady cropped up, just popped into my head. She had two shopping bags. I didn't know what was in them, and she becomes sort of crucial to the scene and has like a little part of her own later. And I kind of really like that. That's just sometimes the way things go, and I've had it in my other books. Just sometimes a character crops up because you need them, you need something to happen, and then suddenly you get interested in what their story is.
There are about three levels of characters in the books I write. One level are the main characters, and they tend to be very, very fleshed out because I write from a first person perspective. So you learn most about those characters, and I guess the the next level, the people who are closest to those characters. And there's another level of character who just kind of move the plot along, whether a very sarcastic bus driver like in Valhalla, who pops up a couple of times, or whether you're talking about the guy who is in the supermarket, he gives Danny a hard time, who interestingly I kind of had in my mind, if it was in a film, would kind of look like Eddie Hall, I think. So you could probably say he was an inspiration for that particular character.
I um i don't plan characters. Some people will write pages and pages of sort of backstory, and I've tried doing that, and I know it's a good thing to do, but it's never really worked for me quite that way. It just, I sort of have to just start writing, and then when I do, I find that characters sort of make their own way. Um, when I've tried to do lists of attributes and exactly what they look like, I don't know. I can't seem to do it. It's just the way my brain works.
The ones that tend to be main characters can be inspired by people very close to me. Um, Obviously, they're not based solely on one person. Otherwise, I would get taken to the cleaners in the in the courts. But they are influenced. If you're going to write about a dad or a mum, you are going to think about your own dad and mum in that. It doesn't mean those characters are exactly your dad and mum, but at the same time there may be elements of their character that you put into those particular characters. But definitely for me, if I think of the books that I've written, and move away from the risk of being sued, if I think about where there's mostly me in that character, I would probably say there's a little bit of me in Tyler, in Midas. There's a hell of a lot of me in Tack, in Lucas. Hell of a lot of me in that. And actually, the new book Valhalla, probably there is quite a lot of me in the main character there, Dustin. Probably mainly because the inspiration for that book was talking with my wife, and we talked about the opportunities we had to get together, that we kind of went past as many times until we finally did get together. So we must have been multiple times as opportunities to get together, and we didn't do it until we finally got together. So we kind of got to talking, well, is there a version of us in a parallel universe that got together at a different point, and how would that look? And that kind of inspired the plot line for Valhalla, actually. And the where Dustin is in his life in that book could easily have been a path that I went down as well.
And then the other one is obviously characters that you need for your story, because for me anyway, it's all about the characters, and your main character, that they have a challenge so sort of profound that that they have to get through it. It's almost life or death, even if it's not actually life or death. If they don't get through their challenge, life is going to be pretty sort of horrendous for them. So basically, everything I think of, this is how I do it anyway, is that the character has to sort of have some, pretty big flaw that they've got to get over. It can be a complete misguided belief, or it can be something that happened to them years ago. My first book, The Mirror Game, my main character, Harry Lark, he was sort of trying to recover from the war, the First World War, and making his way as best he could. So it's like they have this flaw, and basically, but they're deluded about the flaw. They either don't recognise it, or they're trying to live with it, or sort of what their outcome isn't revealed at first. And it's only when the chips are really down that maybe the true purpose is kind of actually revealed, and then the choice is either they're going to overcome that flaw or they're not. But both are sort of interesting. What happens if they overcome it? What happens if they don't?
So I think a lot of it is driven by character creation, is driven by the people that you know in your life, including yourself as well, and especially for someone like me who writes from a first person perspective. But it tends to be more of a collage, so you'll take a little bit of someone's character and stick it together with someone else. So a lot of those characters are, I guess, Frankenstein's monsters in that kind of way. And now that goes for those two level of characters, whether it's kind of, maybe it's three levels, whether there's a main character, and there's quite a few main characters, not just the titular main protagonists. And then the kind of what I'd almost call non-player characters, like from a computer game, the ones that just move the plot along, whether it's a bus driver or an angry customer in the shop. They pop up for one chapter, maybe two, but they don't really add much apart from just pushing the plot along, really.
How I actually come up with a character from scratch. I tend to sort of see a character based on a situation. I guess like Stephen King, I suppose it's similar to Stephen. I'm not comparing myself to him, but he likes to write what ifs. The story I'm writing at the moment is about a man who is a school teacher, and he starts sort of kind of gradually losing his vision. And when he does lose his vision, quite bad things happen to other people around him, and he doesn't know anything about it, and he'll often black out and not be aware of what's happened, and then he'll sort of often dream of sort of like a body buried somewhere. It turns out it really is, and so that the question just became, what if someone was losing their sight and these bad things started happening? What would how would they cope? And I think it's always interesting to take the sort of everyman. I don't particularly like. I don't know. I just don't sort of find it interesting the way I write. To have like a James Bond, Lantern Jawed character who's going to meet everything head on, and I like it to people are sort of vulnerable because human beings are. So so you have this stuff thrown at you and how you're going to deal with it, and I tend to just see that situation. The character will sort of appear.
The other ones which are really interesting because they're not really people, are some of the more supernatural characters in some of the books that I write. So you obviously got a cat in Shimmer. That was inspired by the death of one of our cats called White Nose, and Shimmer looks exactly like that cat. But again, like I said before about kind of cutting and pasting different parts of different people. I know cat's not a person, but although Shimmer looks like White Nose in character, is completely different because White Nose was a very, very timid cat, whereas Shimmer is an incredibly brave and determined cat. And I doubt White Nose would have, although Cat was a very loving cat and loyal as well. Although White Nose was a very loving and loyal cat, I doubt she'd have probably made the journey that Shimmer had. Midas, I quite like these godlike characters. It pops up again, or characters with godlike powers, I guess, because that comes up in Lucas as well. But yeah, Midas, I quite like these characters. They don't reveal all of their characters straight away, which I kind of like. They tend to have wicked senses of humour, which I like, and this is or just have a humour in how they behave as well, because it's very similar in the book I'm writing now, Valhalla. Odin, I wouldn't say he necessarily has a wicked sense of humour. He is very sharp when he needs to be. Actually, he is very good words. I take it back. He is quite sharp, but actually he's quite funny in just his demeanour and how he acts, actually. So there's a lot of humour with those characters, even though they are godlike, and actually in a lot of cases they have some very dark sides of their characters, and as gods they don't necessarily act with the same level of humanity as a person with ethics would.
I do go on look. I like to sort of work out what they look like, and then I might describe a bit of that. Sometimes they might come out looking like someone sometimes not. So sometimes, a lot of times, I kind of see someone in a supermarket or standing in a queue, and they've got sort of some interesting face, and I think, that's sort of, I can picture this person as this character, and that's just a tool, I think, for me. Um, so sometimes you'll see somebody, and maybe even subconsciously, that you'll sort of like think of, associate them with a particular character.
With Midas, that was kind of inspired from watching Fantastic Beasts. The Niffler, who is looks like a platypus but is obsessed with gold, and that kind of led on to Midas, who isn't a platypus. He can present to whatever he wants, really. In the book, he presents as a lizard, and obviously there are elements to Midas which are very much related to gold. So very much that was just from watching a film, inspired that. And if I go into sort of Valhalla, Odin, I mean, I really like this idea. I write delusional fantasy as well as horror. I really like this idea that the main character Dustin can see this character Odin who no one else sees, and he believes he is the Norse god. So I really like that idea. What kind of shaped how Odin acted, though, was more through research. Actually, I didn't want him to be like the Marvel Odin, which I grew up with and I loved, and it's been in the films and all that kind of stuff. I wanted him to be closer to the lore, really. So I've been looking at things like the Volsung saga and other source references around Odin to shape his character. So there's things in there that are very much Odin. He is the warrior. He has got this wisdom, but he's also a poet, and a lot of other gods is a womanizer. So it's in that vein of gods kind of reflecting humanity, but then also wielding this huge power as well. So almost like gods having, I'm kind of coming full circle on this and maybe contradicting myself, but gods having sort of very human like qualities, but then having these godlike powers, which obviously means that if they want to enact vengeance, it's a lot bigger deal than vengeance from a single person.
Sometimes there might be bits of people, like a sort of Frankenstein monster. You'll see a bit of someone, a trait or something. Traits are always good because it's hard to, how many ways you're going to describe someone. They've got blue eyes and sort of short hair and whatever. So sometimes having traits that they always rub the bridge of their nose when they're tired, or sometimes I quite like describing people like that. And so you get that from observing people, I think.